The only God says that man's purpose in life, is tikkun hamidos, and we were put in this world in order to rectify our midos, in order to polish up our midos, and in order to work on our midos. The only God's lashon is, if not for fixing your midos, lama lo chaim. What do you need life for? That's the purpose of life. Now, there's an interesting phenomenon that appears in the Torah, which many people have seen, but may not have taken notice of. The classic example is, if I were to ask you, how many steps are there up to your house, you might not know. One of the reasons being because although you've seen them many times, you haven't necessarily taken notice of them. So there are concepts in the Torah which are the same. We see them all the time. But with a little focus, then suddenly something new comes to light. So a classic example of the Torah is, everybody knows Avram Avinu is referred to as Midas HaChesed. Yitzchak is Midas HaDin, Gvura, and Yaakov is Midas HaEmes. If you take a look, let's examine the life of Avram Avinu. The first thing we find out about Avram Avinu is he abandons his elderly father. After that, he banishes his son, he parts from his nephew, he throws his son out of the house, he gets involved in a world war, he is involved in an act of self-mutilation on himself and on his entire family member, called Bris Milah. He takes a knife to the neck of his second son, and he is called the Ish Chesed. That means, if you stop and think about it, there's nobody else in the Torah that we find walking around with a blade as much as Avram Avinu, and he's called the Ish Chesed. World war, throwing people out of the house. Yitzchak is Din. Yitzchak is Din. He is hardly the image of somebody who we would picture as a strict, stern high school principal. Yitzchak's name means laughter. He is the one who's mitzachik as ishto. He tolerates the wayward son. He's the one who makes shalom with Avimelech by the Plishtim, even though he was wronged. Everything in Yitzchak's life seems to be the opposite of Din. And if possibly the most ironic of all is Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov is called the Ish Emes. Take a look at the life of Yaakov Avinu. He deceives his brother, he deceives his father, he deceives his brother again, he deceives Lavan. Everything that Yaakov Avinu is involved in, there is no one in the Torah who you find as a confidence man, a con artist, like Yaakov Avinu, and he is called the Ish Emes. The pattern, by the way, does not end there, because you find this pattern elsewhere in the Torah. You see that, for example, Tamar is, Chazal say, Kol Kala Shehit Tznuah Bebeis Chameha, a Kala who is Tznuah in her in-law's house, her father-in-law's house, she is zocher that she will have kings and prophets, Melachim v'Neviim, will come from her. Well, Tamar, who is called a Kala who's Tznuah Bebeis Chameha, that's why Yehuda didn't recognize her. If you stop and think about it, where was it that Yehuda saw her? He saw her out at the crossroads, behaving in a way that was far anything but Tznuah. Moshe Rabbeinu was the biggest Anav, and Moshe Rabbeinu, the biggest Anav, is the most coveted, the most prestige, the highest position in history. You'll find later on, Boaz notices Ruth out in the field, because I'll say, why was Boaz looking at women? And the answer is that Ruth was eye-catching litznias, if you think about that paradoxical statement. She was eye-catching litznias. She was about the equivalent of, she says, Chazal say that she bent down in a very tznius way, where everybody else is jumping for the produce, and Ruth is bending down in a very tznius way. It would be the equivalent of being on a college campus at Arizona State University and noticing a young lady walk across the campus in a dress. She's the one who would get all the attention, and all the people with clothing allergies would be ignored. So the pattern, and then what do we find by Ruth? Ruth proposes marriage to Boaz. How does she do it? She goes down to the granary at midnight when they're all alone, completely breaking any rules of what we would call tznius. And so the pattern, find in other places too, Pinchas killing, even though he's an Ish Shalom, he's a grandson of Aaron HaKohen. The pattern repeats itself over and over, and there's a very important lesson here. The lesson is that a midah, to be considered a person who is a Baal Chesed, a person who is a Baal Din, a person who is a Baal Emes, the defining feature of any midah is the ability to go in the opposite direction. A person who is soft and a person who is kind simply because he's a softy, that's not an Ish Chesed. That's a person who happens to be a softy, just can't say no. A person who cannot tolerate the wayward son when he has to, a person who cannot tell a lie when he has to. When a wife asks her husband what he thinks of the new curtains, and the husband knows that he better say the right thing. And under the circumstances, the right thing is that he really couldn't care less, that he has no interest whatsoever. And of course, the husband has to make a sound of interest. Ooh, beautiful, love him. And that is MS. According to Rav Dessler, that's MS. Saying the right thing is MS. That is a defining feature of all midos. Our job in life is to become a person who not only has the good midos, we are in control of our midos. Only then can a person say to be a Baal of that midah.